Stay away from her. The roar cracked through the dusty afternoon like a gunshot. Horses reared. A flock of blackbirds exploded from the cottonwoods lining the creek. The men surrounding the young woman froze, their laughter dying in their throats as boots shifted uneasily in the dirt. She had already shut her eyes, bracing herself for whatever came next. She didn't know who had shouted. She only knew the voice carried the kind of authority that made cruel men hesitate. Slowly, she opened her eyes. He stood at the edge of the clearing, sunlight burning around him like a halo of fire. A lone cowboy, tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, a rifle resting steady across his arm. And he was looking directly at them. "Let her go," he said, quieter this time. Deadlier. The grip on her arm loosened. The man holding her sneered. "This ain't your business, stranger." The cowboy nudged his horse forward, hooves thudding against dry earth. "It is now." The girl's name was Clara Whitmore. She was 22 years old and had been running for nearly a week. Running from a town that had turned its back on her. Running from a man who believed he owned her future. Running from fear that had lived in her chest since the day her father died and left her alone with debts she couldn't pay. She had almost made it past Red Creek. Almost. But 3 ranch hands recognized her from town. They'd followed her trail, laughing about the reward Silas Granger had promised for her safe return. Safe return. The words made her stomach twist. Silas Granger didn't want her safe. He wanted her obedient. And if she refused to marry him, he'd take everything, her father's land, her house, her name. The men had caught her just before she reached the tree line. She had fought, kicked, scratched, bit. It hadn't mattered. Until now. The cowboy's horse stopped 10 paces away. Dust swirled around them in the hot wind. "I won't say it again," the cowboy warned. One of the men laughed nervously. "You don't know who you're crossin'." The cowboy's eyes never left Clara. "Don't need to." His calm was more frightening than rage. The leader of the ranch hands tightened his jaw. "She belongs to Silas Granger." Clara found her voice. "I don't belong to anyone." The man's hand clamped over her mouth. The cowboy's rifle lifted slightly. Silence stretched thin as wire. "Last chance," the cowboy said. The men exchanged looks. They weren't cowards, but neither were they eager to test the resolve of a man who looked carved from stone and didn't blink. One by one, they backed away. The last man shoved Clara toward the ground before retreating. "This ain't over," he spat. The cowboy didn't answer. He waited until they mounted up and rode off in a cloud of bitter dust. Only then did he lower the rifle. Clara's legs gave out beneath her. He dismounted quickly and crossed the distance in long strides, stopping just short of touching her. "Are you hurt?" His voice was different now. Softer. Rough, but careful. She shook her head, though her hands trembled. He noticed. "Easy," he murmured. "They're gone." Clara looked up at him fully for the first time. He was older than she'd first thought. Maybe 35. Sun-weathered skin. A faint scar running from his cheekbone to his jaw. Eyes the color of storm clouds over open plains. "You didn't have to do that," she said weakly. "Yeah," he replied. "I did." He offered his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was firm and warm. Steady. Not demanding. Just there. When she stood, the world swayed slightly, and he instinctively placed a hand at her elbow to keep her upright. The gesture was simple, but it felt like safety. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara." He nodded once. "I'm Daniel Reed." She'd heard the name before. A lone rancher who lived beyond Silver Ridge. Kept to himself. Rarely came into town. Some called him difficult. Others called him dangerous. But none had ever called him cruel. "You shouldn't have interfered," she whispered. "Silas won't let this go." Daniel glanced toward the horizon where the men had disappeared. "Good." The answer startled her. "You don't know what he's capable of." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I know men like him." He stepped back and gestured toward his horse. "You can ride with me. My ranch isn't far. You'll be safe there." Clara's heart pounded. She had learned the hard way that safety was an illusion. That promises came with chains. But something in Daniel's expression held no hunger. No calculation. Just quiet resolve. "And then what?" she asked. "That's up to you. No conditions. No demands. Just choice." She swallowed hard. For the first time in months, someone had given her that. She nodded. Daniel helped her into the saddle before climbing up behind her. He kept a respectful distance, guiding the horse with steady hands. They rode in silence as the sun dipped lower, staining the sky in amber and rose. Clara tried not to think about what might happen when Silas discovered she was gone again. But fear rode with her like a shadow. Daniel's ranch sat in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and wild sagebrush. A modest cabin. A barn sturdy enough to weather hard winters. Fencing that spoke of care, not wealth. It wasn't grand. It was honest. He helped her down gently and tied the horse. "You can stay in the spare room," he said. "It ain't fancy, but it's clean." She nodded, exhaustion pressing down on her bones. Inside, the cabin smelled of pinewood and coffee. A fire crackled softly in the hearth. Clara stood uncertainly near the doorway. Daniel removed his hat and set it on the table. "You hungry?" She realized she was starving. "Yes." He gave a small nod and began preparing something simple: beans, dried meat, bread he'd baked that morning. She watched him move about the kitchen with quiet efficiency. "You live alone?" she asked. "Have for a while." No elaboration. She sensed he carried ghosts of his own. They ate at the small wooden table. Clara devoured the food with more hunger than dignity. Daniel pretended not to notice. Afterward, he showed her the spare room. "There's a lock on the inside," he said. "If it makes you feel better." Her chest tightened unexpectedly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not asking for anything." He held her gaze steadily. "You don't owe me a thing, Clara." The words lodged somewhere deep inside her. That night, she lay awake staring at the wooden ceiling. She expected regret. Instead, she felt something fragile and unfamiliar blooming inside her ribs. Hope. But hope, she knew, was dangerous. Morning came with the sound of hammering. Clara stepped outside to find Daniel repairing a section of fence near the barn. "You don't have to work," he said without turning around. "You can rest. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." She hesitated before walking closer. "Let me help." He studied her for a long moment, then handed her a coil of wire. "All right." They worked side by side under the rising sun. It felt strangely peaceful, until a distant cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Daniel saw it at the same time she did. His posture stiffened. Clara's blood ran cold. "They found me," she breathed. Daniel set down his tools calmly. "Get inside." "No," she said immediately. He looked at her sharply. "I won't hide again." Something flickered in his eyes. "Respect." The riders approached fast. 5 of them, and at their center rode Silas Granger. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the arrogant tilt of his hat, the polished boots, the expensive coat meant to impress. They stopped just beyond the fence line. Silas dismounted slowly, smiling like a man greeting old friends. "Well," he called out. "Isn't this interesting?" Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara without making it obvious. "She leaving with you?" Silas asked lazily. "No," Daniel replied. Silas's gaze slid to Clara. "You've caused quite the trouble, sweetheart." "I'm not your sweetheart," she said, voice trembling but firm. The men behind Silas chuckled. Silas sighed theatrically. "You see, Daniel, Clara here has obligations. Debts her father left unpaid. I've been generous enough to offer marriage as a solution." "I never agreed," Clara shot back. Silas's smile vanished. "Your agreement ain't required." Daniel's voice cut in, low and lethal. "It is now." Silas studied him carefully. "You think you can protect her?" Silas asked. "From me?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Yes." The air thickened. Clara felt the weight of what Daniel was doing. Silas controlled half the cattle trade in the region. He had influence, money, men. Daniel had a rifle and stubborn courage. Silas took a step closer. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Daniel replied evenly. "But she won't." Something in Silas's eyes darkened. "This isn't finished," he warned. Then he turned sharply and mounted his horse. The riders followed. Clara exhaled shakily as they disappeared once more. Daniel didn't move for several seconds. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. He glanced at her. "I won't let him force you. You don't understand. He'll try to ruin you." Daniel's mouth curved faintly. "Wouldn't be the first man to try." She stared at him. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk everything for me?" He looked away toward the open fields. "Because no one stood up for my wife when she needed it." Clara's breath caught. "She's gone," he said quietly. 5 years now. Pain lingered in his tone like an old scar. "She was cornered by men who thought they had the right," he continued. I got there too late. Silence fell heavy between them. I won't be late again, he finished. Tears burned Clara's eyes. For the first time, she saw the man behind the quiet strength. A man who carried regret like a shadow. You can still send me away, she said gently. Before this becomes war. Daniel met her gaze. No. One word. Certain. And something shifted inside her heart. For days afterward, tension wrapped around the ranch like a tightening rope. Daniel prepared. Extra ammunition. Reinforced locks. Quiet conversations with a neighboring rancher who owed him favors. Clara helped where she could. At night, they talked by the fire. She told him about her father's laughter. About how the land once felt like home instead of a trap. He told her about the first time he saw snow fall on these hills. About the silence that followed his wife's passing. Two wounded souls orbiting the same flame. One evening, as thunder rolled across distant hills, Clara stepped onto the porch. Daniel was there already, watching the storm build. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Leaving what? All this. The fighting. He considered it. Running don't end it, he said finally. It just follows you. She understood. Lightning split the sky. Rain began to fall in heavy drops. She turned to go inside but slipped on the wet wood. Daniel caught her instantly. His arm wrapped around her waist. For a suspended heartbeat, they were inches apart. Rain plastered her hair to her face. His hand remained steady at her side, not possessive, just anchoring. You all right? He asked. She nodded, though her pulse thundered louder than the storm. Neither moved. Something unspoken hung between them. Not obligation, not debt, choice. But before either could step closer, a gunshot shattered the night. Wood splintered beside the door. Daniel pulled her down instinctively as another shot rang out. They're here, he muttered. And this time, they hadn't come to talk. The second gunshot tore through the porch railing, spraying splinters across the wet boards. Daniel's arm tightened around Clara as he pulled her behind the thick support beam beside the door. Rain hammered down in sheets, turning the yard into mud and shadows. Stay low, he ordered, voice calm despite the chaos. Another shot cracked from the darkness beyond the fence line. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. The storm swallowed shapes and faces, but she could see movement near the trees, at least 4 riders dismounting. Silas hadn't come to intimidate this time. He had come to destroy. Daniel moved with controlled precision. He guided Clara inside, bolted the door, then crossed to the rifle mounted above the hearth. Go to the back room, he told her. Lock it. No. He looked at her sharply. I won't hide, she insisted, breath trembling but eyes steady. Tell me what to do. For a fraction of a second, he saw not the frightened woman they'd cornered days ago, but someone stronger, someone who had decided she would never again be dragged by force. Another bullet shattered the front window. Glass rained across the floor. Daniel made a decision. All right, he said. Hand me the shells. She moved quickly, grabbing the ammunition box from the shelf. Her fingers shook, but she forced them steady. Outside, boots pounded through mud. A voice carried through the storm. Daniel. Silas called mockingly. You think wood walls can save you? Daniel didn't answer. He moved to the side window, braced the rifle, and fired once. A shout erupted outside. A body hit the ground. Silas cursed. Clara's pulse raced, but something strange was happening beneath the fear. She wasn't helpless anymore. She was choosing to stand. Gunfire exploded again, splintering the doorframe. Daniel crouched beside her. If they get in, he said quietly, you run through the back and head for the ravine. There's a narrow trail. You remember it? Yes. Don't look back. Her chest tightened. And you? She asked. A faint half-smile touched his lips. I'll be right behind you. The door suddenly shuddered under a heavy kick. Then another. The wood groaned. They'll break it, Clara whispered. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the oil lantern on the table. An idea sparked. Help me, he said. They overturned the table, pushing it against the door as another kick splintered the wood. Silas. Clara shouted suddenly, surprising even herself. The kicking paused. Rain filled the silence. You want me? She yelled. Then come take me yourself. Daniel stared at her. Outside, Silas laughed. That's more like it. The door burst inward under a final violent blow. The table toppled. 3 men charged through the entry. Daniel fired once, another man fell. The second lunged forward. Clara grabbed the lantern and hurled it against the floor near the doorway. Flames exploded upward as oil ignited. Fire roared between them and the attackers. The sudden blaze forced the remaining men back with shouts of panic. Smoke began to thicken instantly. Daniel grabbed Clara's hand. Back door. They sprinted through the smoke-filled cabin as flames climbed the walls. Heat licked at their backs. Behind them, Silas screamed orders. They burst into the storm-soaked night just as part of the roof collapsed inward. Rain met fire in a violent hiss. They ran toward the ravine. Mud sucked at their boots. Gunshots chased them through the darkness. Clara stumbled, nearly falling, but Daniel caught her again without breaking stride. They reached the narrow trail carved along the ravine's edge. It was steep and slick. Careful, Daniel warned. Behind them, torches flared in the rain as Silas and his remaining men regrouped. You can't run forever, Silas shouted. Daniel stopped abruptly. Clara looked at him in alarm. What are you doing? He turned to face the approaching lights. Ending it. No, Clara, he said gently but firmly. You deserve a life that isn't spent looking over your shoulder. Her throat tightened. And you deserve one too. For a moment, thunder rolled between them. Then she stepped beside him. I'm not leaving, she said. Something fierce and proud flickered in his storm-gray eyes. The torches came closer. Silas emerged first, fury twisting his features. You burned your own house for her. He sneered. Daniel's voice was steady. You burned it. Silas lifted his pistol. So be it. The world slowed. Clara saw the movement before Daniel did. She shoved him sideways just as Silas fired. The shot grazed her arm, spinning her backward. Pain exploded white-hot. Daniel roared, a sound Clara had never heard from him before, and fired in the same instant. Silas staggered. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Rain poured down. Silas looked down at the spreading stain across his chest. Shock replaced arrogance. He collapsed into the mud. The remaining men froze. Their leader lay still. Daniel stepped forward, rifle steady. Leave, he said coldly. They didn't argue. Within seconds, they disappeared into the storm, abandoning their fallen employer. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Clara. Let me see, he said urgently. It's just a graze, she gasped, clutching her arm. Blood mixed with rain, but the wound wasn't deep. Relief flooded his face so powerfully it almost broke him. You could have been killed, he whispered. So could you, she replied weakly. Thunder rolled softer now. The storm was moving on. He helped her stand carefully. Behind them, the ranch house burned in angry orange against the rain-dark sky. Everything he owned was turning to ash. And yet, when he looked at Clara, alive, breathing, he didn't feel loss. He felt clarity. They made their way slowly to the neighboring ranch of Thomas Hale, an older widower Daniel had once helped during a harsh winter. Thomas opened the door wide at the sight of them. Lord above, he muttered. What happened? It's over, Daniel said simply. Clara's wound was cleaned and bandaged. By morning, word had spread. Silas Granger was dead. Without him, his hired men scattered like smoke. The debts he claimed over Clara's land were discovered to be inflated, manipulated through intimidation. Thomas and 2 other ranchers came forward, testifying to Silas's coercion. Within days, Clara's property was legally restored to her name. Justice, though delayed, had finally found its mark. A week later, Clara stood on the hill overlooking the charred remains of Daniel's cabin. I'm sorry, she whispered. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets. It was wood and nails, he said. That's all. But it was your home. He glanced at her. Home isn't the walls. She felt the truth of that settle deep inside her. They began rebuilding. Not the same cabin. A new one. Stronger foundation. Wider porch. Bigger windows. They worked side by side each day. And something quiet and beautiful grew between them, not rushed, not forced. Chosen. One evening, as the sun melted gold across the valley, Clara stood watching Daniel hammer the final board into place. You saved my life, she said softly. He shook his head. You saved mine too. She walked closer. How? I was living like a ghost, he admitted. Breathing, working, but not living. You reminded me what it means to fight for something. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I was afraid my whole life would be decided by men like Silas, she said. But you gave me something he never did. What's that? A choice. Silence wrapped around them in warmth instead of fear. Daniel reached into his pocket slowly. Clara's breath caught. It wasn't a grand ring. Just a simple silver band. I don't want to own you, he said quietly. And I don't want to rescue you. He stepped closer. I want to stand beside you. If you'll have me. The wind stirred her hair gently. For a moment, she saw the frightened girl by Red Creek. Then she saw the woman she had become. I'm not staying because I need saving, she said. I know. I'm staying because I choose you. His breath left him in something like a laugh, something like a prayer. She slipped the ring onto her finger. And this time, when he wrapped his arms around her, it wasn't to shield her from harm. It was to hold her in peace. Months later, the valley looked different. Laughter carried across the fields. Fences stood stronger. The new house gleamed under open skies. Travelers passing through sometimes spoke of the fire that once lit the hills. Of the tyrant who fell. Of the cowboy who stood his ground. But those stories only told half the truth. The real story wasn't about gunfire or revenge. It was about a woman who refused to be owned. And a man who learned that strength isn't control, it's protection without possession. One evening, as they sat on their finished porch watching the sunset, Clara rested her head against Daniel's shoulder. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. Regret what? Standing up for me that day. He thought back to Red Creek. To the moment he heard her cry. To the choice he made. No, he said firmly. I'd do it again. She smiled. The sky burned gold and crimson above them. And for the first time in both their lives, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to build. Together.